Hello, my name is Dima Hamadmad. I'm recording this video from Jordan. Unfortunately, I couldn't join the conference in person because my visa was refused twice. But I'm glad that I'm still able to participate in this conference. So thanks for Refugee Hosts team for offering this opportunity. I'm part of the panel Disrupting Humanitarian Narratives, and I would like to disrupt one common narrative about Syrian context in general. But first I would like to add a personal dimension, background, history, just to connect it to what I'm going to talk about today and to explain how I see things. So first of all, I'm Syrian, and I mean, obviously my visa was refused twice, most probably because of this passport. But I'm Syrian, and before the Syrian uprising in 2011, I have never thought that I would introduce myself by this fact. It didn't mean anything to me being Syrian. My family was displaced in 1980s when Hafez al-Assad ruled Syria with a very oppressive regime. We are from Hama city, where Hafez committed a massive massacre in 1982, killing almost 30,000 of the city's residents and shutting down a small uprising against him. I lost my grandfather and my uncle at that time. And my family had to flee, and they have never came back to Syria. So I was born in Jordan with a Syrian passport, and I have never visited Syria because my father always thought that it is very dangerous for us to go there. So with a Syrian passport, living in Jordan and unable to visit Syria, I had this unclear identity. I didn't feel that I belonged to anything or any place. And despite that I haven't been physically displaced, I always felt that I'm a displaced person. And perhaps it is because this lost identity or displaced identity. And I think this is the case for the whole generation. So when the Syrian uprising started in 2011, I suddenly felt that I belonged to one thing and I have an identity. And it became a life purpose, and since then, being Syrian suddenly has a meaning. And those brave people who stood up against one of the most dictatorial regimes and chanted for freedom and dignity through the most beautiful, peaceful demonstrations, they made me proud that I'm Syrian, and I'm still, despite everything has happened. And since then, I like to introduce myself in that way. I think this is the case for the whole generation as well. Afterwards, I became very sensitive to any false or inaccurate description of the Syrian uprising. And I feel that any inaccuracy is unjust in many ways. And I feel that I have to defend my restored identity, my belonging, my purpose, to defend those brave people who sacrificed their lives for this uprising. And regarding this sensitivity, I reflect on a story happened 2 years ago with me. So one day I was sitting with a professor who I really admire and respect, and I sent my greetings to her if she's listening right now. And we were writing a description about the research we were working on, and it was studying the impact of trauma on Syrian refugees. And when she wanted to write contextual description about Syria, she used the word civil war. So I stopped there and I told her we should not use this word because it is not a civil war and it is an uprising, and we should use the word uprising. So she told me that we as researchers should be objective and neutral, and this is the way that everyone uses to talk about Syria, in media, in research, in politics, everywhere. So I disagreed with her and I insisted to use the word uprising. And just an example, I will show you short videos of this great uprising. what made me proud. What happened in Syria was a peaceful uprising. It started in Durham city, when young children were detained and tortured because they drew anti-Assad graffiti at the school's wall, on the school's wall. Their families went to the governor to ask him to release their children, but he only humiliated them. This was one graffiti drawn in one wall, on the school's wall, and it says, "Doctor, your turn," and doctor refers to Bashar al-Assad. And this was the spark of the Syrian uprising, and the peaceful demonstrations started across the country and chanting for dignity and freedom. But the Assad regime only responded through the most violent possible ways, killing demonstrators, committed massacres, detaining, torturing, and one of those who tortured them also children. So, for example, Hamza al-Khatib and Family al-Shar'i, they were detained during the protests in April 2011, and the Assad forces detained them and tortured them to death. And they were also a symbol for the Syrian uprising, and they were a spark for the demonstrations in Syria. It doesn't matter how the world saw the uprising, and it doesn't matter what the world turned it into. And what I care about it is that the truth, and the truth is that it was an uprising. But why does it matter to write civil war or uprising? Does it really matter? So it is not only about minor details or a couple of words, because these words matter, and it does matter how we talk about events and how we represent the human sufferings. And it does matter how we tell others' stories. Every narrative we use has an impact, and this claimed objectivity has also an effect. I will be back to the research we were writing, its description at the beginning. For that research, I interviewed many Syrian mothers, women, and mothers specifically, and I collected their stories. And I remember one mother, she was pregnant when she left Syria to Jordan so she can give birth there. And her husband stayed in Syria and promised her that he will follow her just after she arrives. He couldn't join her because he was a leader of the uprising in his neighborhood. Soon after she arrived to Jordan, she heard about that he has martyred, and she spent the last month of her pregnancy grieving on him. And when she gave birth to her son, she named him on the name of his father. Every time I visit her, she tells me how her son looks like his father, and he's very much similar to him. He talks like him, he acts like him, and sometimes he uses the same phrases his father one day used. And she envisions him, and she believes that her son, who only knows his father through her stories, will be just like him, brave, strong, strives to help people and to defend and fight for the truth and stands against oppressors. I very much also remember another mother. Her son chose to participate in the revolution, but he then was killed by the Assad forces. She is one of the strongest mothers I have ever seen. Despite her huge loss of her son, she never gives up. When I am sometimes in despair and I see no hope, I find her still has the deep faith that we should continue this uprising. We should continue demanding for our rights and freedom and dignity, and we should never stop. She's still in contact with all the activists in her neighborhood, in her city, following their news and grieving on the lost ones as they are all her sons. These are only two stories among thousands and thousands others. For these collective stories, it would be wrong to put them in a context that is vague, unclear, a context that avoids telling the truth and avoids referring to the actual perpetrators and the actual events. It is not ethical to take these stories out of their true context and say it is just a civil war or very vague words like conflict or crisis or war, as there were equal parties fighting each other on some interests, and without referring to the actual perpetrator, the Assad regime and his allies. And this out of context stories and displacement turn refugees into a mere emergency case, people who only run from a random war or a random crossfires and who deserve the international compassion, but with no referral to the cause of their displacement and their sufferings. And there is a cause behind all this. This representation ignores the refugees' rights to justice and accountability, their rights to hold those who caused their sufferings accountable. And as long as we claim to be objective and neutral, to just say it is a civil war, or to be grey enough to not mention the crimes of the Assad regime, or not accurately describe how all this originally started, as long as we do that, we ignore the very important rights of refugees to ask for justice, and through these rights they only can heal and restore their lives back. The impact of this narrative not only stops there, but moreover, it impacts the local responses in hostile countries. So when one says it is a war or a civil war, the first normal response would be of the host would be compassion. However, when this objective narrative says that this war reached to an end, or the shelling has stopped and the cities can be inhabited again, the normal local response would probably be that refugees now should go back home, and they can go back home since it's safe and stable, and that the war has stopped. And here are some of the narratives used in some articles. For example, saying that as the 18-year-long war appeared to be coming to an end. Or this from The Guardian, where Lebanon President Shamon said recently international aid should be paid to Syrian refugees after they returned home to encourage their return. In this so-called stable country, that there are still thousands detained by Assad and dying under torture every day, and that the regime's forces still detaining everyone who's trying to come back and who thought that it is safe enough to come back to Syria. So also, in this mentioned in this article, by the Irish Times, that refugees who voluntarily returned to Syria from Germany faced arrest, torture, and conscription, and some were killed in the prisons run by Bashar al-Assad regime. And also this by Foreign Policy about two stories of two men who were detained after they came back to Syria. So one question we might ask ourselves, why specifically now, after 8 years of displacement, why now we are witnessing racist acts against refugees? Why now is the hostility growing in the hosting countries? We should think very much of how we represent the whole context and what the impact of civil wars can have. At the end, I know that for researchers, objectivity means telling the truth, and regardless what others say, and regardless any previous bias. And telling the truth requires using the right words. Yes, we have to be objective, yet truth tellers. And yes, we have to be neutral, yet clear and accurate. We are documenting our history through these narratives, and we have to document it correctly for our future generations. On the same day, I had that discussion with the professor about what words to use in the description. I found an email from her at the evening inviting me for a documentary about Syria. And she wrote in her email, Dima, the Syrian uprising, tonight in my department. And we went together, and at the end I glimpsed tears in her eyes. While I'm watching, I remembered all the Syrian martyrs who sacrificed their lives to document events and to tell the truth. I feel that I have that obligation towards them, and that same obligation towards all those who told me their stories. That obligation that I will be objective enough to tell the truth. Here I present some photos of the brave media activists who martyred in Syria. Their memories will always remain alive. Thank you for listening, and I leave you with these photos.